was a quitter, so I ride on. 19 more problems, money calling, blowing on my iPhone。I'm the one to keep your eyes on。他们没想到的世界开工，去了宣传超速20级的台风，地球奥秘没时间一个个猜中，宇航员会探索未知的外太空。一飞冲天的高度到7层外失重，闭上眼睛我从来没做过白日梦，闭上眼睛我从来只想往外直冲。有一天黄皮肤也能踏进白宫。All the bygones they can be the bygones。Surrounded by fear, turn the lights on. I ain't got no option, already been shut down. 软弱的每一面都要被光芒遮挡。I'm going down for real, down for real. I can't sleep, I can't sleep. Staying up all night, wish my life was not my life. I'm going down for real, down for real. Thought I gotta graduate, but college ain't a place for me. It's the choice I had to make, cause I got somewhere else to be. 他们不想让我累了，不想让我背着，不想让我被焦虑击碎，含着花了碰着，不想让我废了。Done with finals, I'm around back to a place called home. Long nights, 16-hour flight across the time zone. Things change when I ain't here. All the noises that I can't hear. Stepping in the house, shouting, Mama, I'm home. But she moved out from the master bedroom. Don't judge by my 3.9 report card. Please do that when I'm swerving in my sports car. When I landed JFK, my family fell apart. But I called and told them how New York was. I'm going down for real, down for real. I can't sleep, I can't sleep. Staying up all night, wish my life was not my life. I'm going down for real, down for real. 他们说了太多情绪在失控，现在只想逃离这里做个白日梦。睁开眼睛，我还试着想往外直冲，有一天黄皮肤也能踏进白宫。All the bygones, they can be the bygones. Surrounded by fear, turn the lights on. I ain't got no option, already been shut down. I'm going down for real, down for real. I am going down. I can't sleep, I can't sleep, I can't sleep. Staying up all night, wishing my life was not my life, not my life. Down for real, down for real. Down, 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 down. Back on, back on. Down, 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 down. Never was a quitter, so I ride on. 19 more problems.
Welcome back to the Professor Penn podcast. David Penn here. This is episode number 143, coming to you on Thursday night, September 12th, 7:30 p.m. Central Time. Sand pebbles. Sand pebbles. This is a little bit of a difficult episode title to sort out, but as we go through the night, good morning, Tanner.
Good morning, David.
We'll get on through it. You're going, what the heck is sand pebbles, right?
I read it out loud when I sat down.
He was like, wow, what does that mean? Anyhow, we started out with a piece of music by a Chinese pop star named Lexi Liu. And what's interesting about this is it's a fusion of English and Chinese, and it's very well done. I like this artist's music very much, mainly because I'm a bit of a fusion of West and East myself, and I just love the creativity that is on display in this video and audio track. It's pretty profound. There's a lot of copying that goes on in music all over the world. People copy. And there isn't a lot of new stuff. I mean, there's like lawsuits all the time. Like, you ripped off my riff.
Yeah.
That's all the time it's happening. But there's a lot of creativity. If you go listen to Lexi Liu's songbook, she's out there doing her own thing. And it's very entertaining. But the reason I'm attracted to it, in addition to the music, is I'm going through a period of reevaluating what I think about China and the Chinese people. I don't believe in getting stuck, and things are always changing. So I thought tonight we'd talk about China, directly, really walk through some issues around China. And it's really the news that matters. We had the debate this past Tuesday night. Went down kind of the way we scripted it out, right?
Yeah.
You really got to be into the philosophies of these people. There's one philosophy that's about self-governance. It's called republicanism. There's another philosophy called the post-World War II Democrat liberal order. Choose up, okay? What do you like? You like tyranny or self-governance? Hey, they don't really call it tyranny over here. And this goes into my conversation about China a little bit because my Chinese friends are constantly saying we have too much freedom. Too much freedom.
Americans or
Yeah, we got
them?
too much freedom.
Oh,
And the reason they have this orientation is uh, the Chinese never had the concept of republicanism because republicanism is built on the foundation of Judeo-Christianity. And really, if you want to be political about it, it's really, you're not going to like this, some of you. It's really the concept of monotheism. Monotheism. I'll leave out the Judaism. I'll just call it monotheism in the sense that the original people that practiced monotheism, these people were warriors in a desert. Okay, they were self-governing to the max. They're up against it every day. The experience of the Roman Catholic Church a little bit different. In other words, when you got a bunch of decentralized power, decentralized groups, for example, in the original monotheistic prayer, you need 10 men. Why do you need 10 men? Well, hey, if you're going to stop and pray and not pay attention, you better have some cover. Someone's got to have your back. But when we got to the Roman Catholic Church, that's the Roman Catholic Church. It was very centralized, very authoritarian, very top down, and it was ruling Europe in association with those monarchies. So it's a very different kind of a formation than the original practitioners of monotheism. Which brings up a comment I got from Mitchell this morning. He was commenting on something 2 podcasts ago, I was talking about my stepson, uh, and I was talking to him about reading the Bible. He's a young Catholic boy, and he told me he only reads the Bible when he gets a assignment from the priest after confession. And I said, well, that's a little strange because it's a negative association, an association of, search for truth and punishment. And I want him to read the Bible all the time just for uplift. And Mitchell came on and said, that's not really my experience. And I was very deferential, and I don't mean to impose upon anybody, uh, something that's not right or, because I'm standing on my own street corner, right? So here's my street corner. I'm going to delve into this just a little bit farther. Uh, when I was young, I mean, really young, I'm talking about in the 60s, early 60s, I lived in a neighborhood with a lot of Catholic families, and my best friends, we were kids, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. Everybody was Catholic. And I spent a lot of time in their homes. And these homes had big Bibles on display in the living rooms. And these Bibles had some kind of familial significance. Like in the Bible in the front, there'd be a genealogy of the family. And the way the Bible was displayed, it was really given a lot of centrality in the family. But then when I asked these families, do you read this Bible? They didn't read it, which I was mind blown and didn't think much about it. And then, subsequently, when I got to be a good violin player, I started playing a lot of Catholic masses as gigging, right? Because they want to have music there. And then I've been to a lot of Catholic masses because I have close friends that are Catholic. I've probably been to 100 Catholic masses, 100. I don't think I'm exaggerating. So it's not, you say, well, why do you do that? Well, because my father was an anthropologist and I've been in a mosque. I've been to China. I've been all over the world. I'm interested in culture. Culture is interesting to me. So I've been to midnight mass many times on, at Christmas. I really was interested in Catholicism. And what I noticed in the mass was, as I compared it to my own experience as a practitioner of Judaism, Jewish people read the 5 books of Moses, they call it the Torah. They read it on a calendrical schedule, and it's the centerpiece of the prayer ritual of every week. And it takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of prayer around it, and it's a big deal. It's really, truly a big deal. Um, then in the Catholic Church, they might read a line or two. And I thought, well, that's kind of diminishing that. And I'm talking about one line from the Old Testament and one line from the New Testament. And then the priest would comment, give a sermon, right? And, when we go to, the Jewish synagogue, we'd show up about 8 o'clock in the morning and I'd get home about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's the way it worked. But when I went to Mass, we rolled in at 10. We were out at 11, had time to go for breakfast, and I was in my easy chair for the Vikings game right on time. And I'm not trying to be disparaging. I'm saying that the notion or the nature of worship was different. It was different. And I'm not trying to say one's better than the other, but I am saying that somehow the centrality of the individual search for truth or the top-down, we're going to tell you what the truth is thing, I'm just saying to me as an anthropologist, it seems to me, and I was coming into that comment that Mitchell called me out on, I have a bias. It seems to me that individual search for truth had been diminished from Judaism to Catholicism. It seemed that way to me. And Mitchell's corrected me, and maybe I'm opening up a debate, and I'm not trying to create controversy. I just have to call them the way I see them from my street corner. Maybe Mitchell's never been to 100 Orthodox Jewish services. So I have both those polarities, but my point in saying it was, maybe I was wrong, maybe I was right about my stepson seemingly to me associating penance with Bible study, and I said, well, that had to come from someplace. And I might be completely wrong. But what I'm completely right about is he's not searching for truth. He's playing video games. So something has changed. I mean, there's something that, it could be just him. But he goes to church every Sunday, and he prays every time he eats, and he's very Catholic in his demeanor, but he hasn't uptaken yet, at 15 years old, the search for truth. So all of us can intensify that. And when I say the search for truth, I mean the search for truth across the board. Across the board. If it comes to media. If it comes to faith, if it comes to science, if it comes to learn how to do something like woodworking. Me, maybe my generation, but me, I'm into that. Like I say, if I could get another life out of this life, like I got an extra 50 years, I'd become an expert at deconstructing engines because that's so cool, right? I had a friend of mine, Pat Marley, and he's a black Irishman. I haven't seen him in a long time. Go over to his house. He had all these old Mercedes-Benz up on bricks. And he'd say, I'm going to restore these vehicles. Of course, they never got restored, but I thought it was cool. Anyhow, Mitchell, I don't mean anybody any disrespect. And I got to share it like I see it. And we're going to talk about China tonight, which this is a great entree into the China concept because I made the statement that the Chinese think there's too much freedom. And I try to relate that to Roman Catholicism, which is also very top-down. And I said, well, there's this other group of dudes out there. Man, they're just in the search for truth. And they're on their own. And I'm one of those dudes. But in China, there's this history of dynasties, right? You've heard of the Chinese dynasties, right, Tanner? And the Chinese are really cool about it. They say, every couple, 200-300 years, you got to change clothes. And they're cool with it. And all these dynasties were monarchies. There was an emperor. There was a king. There was a top dog. And they'd rule, and their families would rule, and intergenerationally. And then we got to 1911, and there was a revolution in China. The Qing dynasty came apart, the last dynasty. There was the last emperor, and there was a revolution there, and there was a Republic of China, like the Irish Republican Army or the Republic of the United States of America. The same thing, but it didn't really work there because the Chinese are not Republicans, because Republicanism is based on monotheism, i.e., that a creator has granted me unalienable rights and I am the sovereign. They don't have that orientation at all. They just don't have it. So it didn't last long. And we're going to talk about that uh, tonight uh, and how important it is for us to understand how important it is for me to understand my relationship to China and the Chinese people and to evolve what I'm thinking because things are changing. I just want to say for those of us in Minnesota who are politically motivated, there is a Redfield Wilton Strategies poll. This is a very reputable polling operation that polled Minnesota August 25th through 28th. And they were checking on the senatorial campaign. And what did they find out? That Amy Klobuchar, Democrat, had 41% support. Royce White, Republican, had 34, which means he's down what? 7. And there's 18% undecided. So this race really is up for grabs. So again, going back to my theory of, the people are great, but that's really what they represent. Sometimes the people aren't so great. So you got Royce White, who's representing self-governance in the philosophy of republicanism, going back to monotheism. And we've got Kamala Harris and her group, which in this state is Amy Klobuchar, and she's representing the Democrat liberal order. So on this side of the equation, we've got a creator that grants us unalienable rights. And on this Democrat liberal order side, we've got a man-made governance that seeks to control our actions. On this side, I control my own actions. I mean, we just got to get away from the hype. Get away from the hype. It's really not complicated. All the different policies, all different, no. It's going to sort itself out if we just realize that this group self-governs and this group wants to be governed. And going back to the Chinese do not want to self-govern. They do not. They want to be governed. And we're going to talk about that a lot tonight. But if you're in Minnesota or if you're any place in this country and you love freedom, it's time to get down and boogie. We're about 50 days out. There's plenty of time to door knock, which means lit drop. Call people. Get the low propensity voters to the polls. There's plenty of time to actually put your shoulder to the mainmast and actually get involved in the ground game of politics, even if it just means calling your neighbors. I went up last night and spent last night with two associates and tried to set up a big deal for like 1,000 people to bring Royce to a rally here just in a couple weeks. And it worked. They're very open to it. So he's going to get to talk to 1,000 people. I'm doing my ground game thing. We got to get down. We got to get down. We got to boogie. We got to do it right now. PrecinctStrategy.com, TrumpForce47.com. Go to your local party. Call them. Say, I want to volunteer. Boy, and these two guys I met with last night, I just looked at them. They're smart guys. And I said to them, are you in the party? And I kind of got down on them. And then they told me how involved they really were. And I said, that's great. Now, let's get coordinated and go into the party and do those same political actions in a coordinated fashion, join the statewide movement. And that's to everybody that's watching in Kentucky or, New York or California. I said, this is attributed to Dan Schultz, but I've uptaken it because I do believe it's true. Nobody can guarantee, nobody can tell what the future is. We're not fortune tellers. We don't know where this is headed. We don't know if the republic can be saved. We do not know. But I am sure that if we don't get in as American citizens into the Republican Party and make it a nationalist organization with a clear mission and clarify what its philosophy is about, which is republicanism, if we don't do that, we're not going to make it. Because right now, hey, we see it. Dick Cheney and all of his ilk, they're supporting Kamala, but they still say that they're Republicans. What that does is muddy the waters. We don't need to muddy the waters. I got people right here in Minnesota, they don't support Trump. They don't support Royce White. They say they're Republicans. That muddies the waters. But you know what? It's election season. We're all going to be unified now. There's plenty of time to sort this out after. Right now, we got republicanism and the post-World War II Democrat liberal order. Pick a side of the football. get your shoulder on the mainmast and push, because these folks over here, the Democrat liberal order, they're large and in charge. Republicanism, it's on its last legs. What is on its last legs? I am the sovereign of my own life. You're the sovereign of your own life. Do you like that, Tanner? You said you liked it, right?
I appreciate that.
But it is a little terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah.
You got to take responsibility for everything.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't like that, though. Why would you like that? That means you have nobody to blame but yourself.
Yeah. I think it's more of a, deep down my desire is I want that, but I think I get so scared because I'm not acclimated to that. My whole life, I'm a young man. 18 years of my life, I was dependent on my parents. So then I've only been 6 years of an adult, and it's like they don't, even when you're an adult, they don't make it easy. I went to college and it felt like I was still a kid, and now I'm starting to feel like an adult.
You know,
So-
in Judaism, you become a man at the age of 13. 13. After you're 13, everything counts. Before 13, hey, you get what do they call that? Juvenile court. But after 13, hey, you're on the line. Why are you on the line? Well, first of all, when they came up with that rule, people probably didn't last that long, number one. Number two, constantly at war. Number three, hey, if you can do the deed, do the deed. It was just that simple. They figured, hey, you can get a woman pregnant, you can kill somebody, hey, you're a man.
Yeah.
13-year-old. We got all these school shootings. These kids are 13, 14, 15, 16 years old shooting up schools, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's an adult act to shoot up a school. It's an adult act to get a woman pregnant or a young girl pregnant at the age of 14, 15 years old. So in my faith tradition, hey, after 13, you're on the line, baby. You're on the line. But see, here in America, we get an extra 5 years of juvenile arresting.
If not more.
If not more.
Yeah.
Well, some people go to their 50, They go until their teeth start falling out. The news that matters. We're going to start out with China. We're going to stay with China because I'm thinking about China a lot. I have a lot of Chinese associates. I have some very close Chinese friends. I've thought about China in a certain way for a considerable period of time, and my thinking is going to change now because life does not stay fixed. Paradigm shift. If you don't shift with the paradigm, hey, baby, you're left behind in the dust. China is expanding its nuclear arsenal faster than any other nation. For the first time a nuclear weapon was used in war, that was on August 6, 1945, when we the people, and we've covered this on the podcast, for suspicious reasons decided to drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. And by the end of that year, by the end of 45, 140,000 people, civilians. These were not troops, right? This was the civilian population of Hiroshima. They had died. And just for good measure, a few days later, the United States, we the people, dropped a nuclear bomb on Nagasaki. And that's the only time nuclear weapons have been used in combat. But, just because they're not being used doesn't mean people aren't getting ready to get down. There's currently 9,585 nuclear weapons in military stockpiles for potential use across 9 countries, with the United States and Russia, that's we the people, account for 8,088 of these nuclear weapons. 8,088. That's a lot of nuclear weapons. China is growing its arsenal at the fastest pace. In 2023, last year, increasing its arsenal from 410 warheads to 500. So China's now into a rapid catch-up with the United States in nuclear capabilities and in every other thing. Going to come back to China. I just want to pop over to Israel for a second. And because, this is another thing, China's getting involved in the Middle East, which is going to change the dynamics of the Middle East very considerably, because that's, to the Chinese mind, that's their backyard. To us, it's exotic. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is rejecting growing pressure on him to reach a deal with Hamas. So the world's clamoring for peace, and Netanyahu's saying he won't let anybody, quote unquote, preach to him. So how is he circumventing this effort to create a peace agreement or a ceasefire? And as I've talked about on the podcast, and Netanyahu's not backing down, there is a corridor, there is a connection between the Gaza Strip and Egypt. It's called the Philadelphia Corridor. And here's what he says: the axis of evil, that would be Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis, that axis needs the Philadelphia Corridor. And for that reason, we must control the Philadelphia Corridor. That's Netanyahu said, precisely for that reason. Hamas insists for that reason that we not be there, and for that reason alone, I insist that we are there. So, there you go. So the war continues, and I think that's suiting the purposes of many people because a lot of things are changing over there. In the meantime, Israel is now entering the West Bank because, you got the Gaza Strip, and then you have Palestinians on the West Bank, and they're now starting to replicate on the West Bank the same kind of military tactics that they've employed in the Gaza, which is quite heavy. The war expands. Something to think about. I don't want to get into it too deeply, but we're going to end up talking about it because it is what it is. Since I saw you last, Hunter Biden. Have you seen that Hunter Biden, Tanner, entered a guilty plea on his tax evasion indictment?
Yeah.
How cool he is. You got to love a son like this. He's taken one for the family. Here's what he said. For all I have put them through over the years, I can spare them this, so I've decided to plead guilty. How nice it is. How sweet it is. The sentencing is scheduled for a few days after the election. President Biden is going to resign at the end of this term. He's done 4 years. And what do you think the chances are of him pardoning his son? I would say 100%. President Biden is going to, because he's going to die anyhow. So he doesn't have to live with it very long. He's just going to do something quite crass and quite craven. He's got a son who's a criminal. He's going to pardon him. Not for any good reasons, just because, hey.
And then watch, that side are going to be, well, wouldn't you do the same for your son, David? Wouldn't you do that for your son? They'll start making excuses of why it's okay that they pardoned him.
Yes, they are going to do that.
I hope not. That's just my prediction.
Of course they're going to do that. Because we've lost sacred honor. Sacred honor. I have kids, and I hope I've raised them so that they don't commit felonious crimes. But hey, my son one time, man, if Jake's listening to this, he's going to remember this. It's funny. When he was a high schooler, he was a gangster. I mean, he was truly a gangster. And I said to him, man, you're going to get busted. And he looked at me, gave me a bunch of shit. He's about 17. Told me I didn't know. I said, hey, if you want to learn how to do this and not get busted, I can teach you. But you won't even listen to me on that basis, let alone stop. Please stop. But maybe you want to learn how not to get busted. And he just told me, hey, Dad, f off. I'm smarter than you. Okay, cool. So I knew he was going to get busted, and I was sitting at my office desk on Sunday night. It was about, 7:30, and the phone rang, and I picked up the phone, and I heard Jake's voice, and I knew. I just hung up the phone on him. I knew he'd been busted. He didn't even get a word out. I let him sit in jail for 5 days. I went down to pick him up. The cop says to me at the jail, he goes, we get these young kids in here and we terrify them so that we scare them straight. But your son, he's really a gangster. He likes it here. I thought that was pretty cool. Anyhow, he turned out okay. That's another story for another day. I probably have told it before. He's a miracle. Anyhow, on the transition into China, we talk about Mexico. You're going to say, how is China and Mexico related? That's a stretch, right? No, it's not. If you remember back a few podcasts ago, I said that a self-avowed communist, Claudia Sheinbaum, had been elected to the presidency a 6-year term in Mexico. Her predecessor, AMLO, is also a communist. So Mexico has fallen. The people are voting for communism there. They like it. They like authoritarianism. They had the concept of self-governance. They did. They did. They did. And Catholic Church was there. El Norte is right around the corner. And there's a lot of people that want to self-govern there. But there's more people that say, yeah, that's a lot of work.
So I just want to mention this real quick. Is it at all a concern, and maybe I'm not understanding it right, but isn't Canada kind of following the same kind of with Justin Trudeau? It's kind of following the same path of becoming communist.
Yeah.
So now Mexico is doing it. Should we be worried that our two neighboring land masses are pushing towards communism?
They're not pushing. They're there.
Okay.
We're the last man standing, and we're standing. We're kind of woozy. In fact, we're getting ready to go down ourselves because, as we're going to talk about with China, this battle is mostly not understood by us philosophically, how long this battle's been going on and what it really means. Because we're going to talk about this very issue in just a couple minutes as it relates to the history of China. Because I think we need to understand China as American people and understand what makes us different and special, and that's republicanism, self-governance, that I'm a sovereign. But in Mexico, that's done. So what's happening in Mexico? What's the news that matters in Mexico is it's September. The new president, the president-elect, will be sworn in on October 1st. But we got 1 month where the old president has the power to do whatever he wants to do. And right now what he's doing is he's taken down the judicial system, which is because they had a system of checks and balances like here in the United States. They have a legislature and a president and a court system. But that pesky court system, like our Supreme Court. You notice how the Democrats, they want to expand the court. They want to make term limits on the court. Same deal. When you take that guardrail off, when you remove that guardrail of judicial check and balance, you can do whatever the hell you want to do. And that's what's happening in Mexico. And people go, wow, should we be worried about Mexico? Well, let me tell you what's going on in Mexico. The Chinese are in an economic invasion of Mexico. We have an agreement. We know this agreement. It's called the USMCA, the United States-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement. It was consummated by Robert Lighthizer in association with AMLO and Trudeau under the President Trump administration. And it created and replaced NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. It allegedly was a much better deal for the United States of America. And it might have been. And it's up for review every 5 years. However, what I don't think Robert Lighthizer, who was the trade representative at that time, and President Trump, who was, pretty anti-trade with China during his administration, I don't really think they anticipated the Chinese pouring into Mexico on every industry from tires to glass to cars to everything, going to Mexico to use that free trade agreement to get access to the United States. And now they're communists down there. So we got communists doing business with communists. And guess what? If Harris wins, we got communists everywhere. All ever. So it's called neoliberal trade policy, neoliberal, i.e. communist, Marxist, socialist, Democrat. I don't care what you call it. What it really means is over on this side of the ledger, human beings are going to tell me how to live my life. And over on this side of the ledger, going to disappear. No longer part of the deal. Not in the room, not in the deal. Self-governance, a historical period that was overcome by what will be fenced as a far more superior ideology. And how they're going to do that is they're going to say that whole thing was based on an illusion that there's a God. Those people were all in an alternative reality. I heard this morning on MSNBC. These people are in an alternative reality. Well, yes, we are in an alternative reality. And if you don't live in that reality, it doesn't exist. I can go over into this science reality. I'm actually trained in math and science. I'm good at it, really good at it. So I can do their thing, but they can't do my thing. And I find that really interesting. That's kind of what the podcast is about. It's like, okay, we got this thing. I mean, I drove to work today. I didn't walk. I'm not, I'm not like an Amish guy in a horse and buggy. I got in my vehicle and I rode over here at high speed. And we're in this digital studio, right? I mean, we're not rejectors of science. But I got this other thing I've been working on since I was knee high to the grasshopper called faith, search for truth. To me, they're not really at odds. I kind of see the whole thing holistically. And then I put in the Chinese part, which I've said many times, which we've got the Judeo-Christian history, monotheism, and then you got the natural way over in China. And I want to talk about that tonight because that's so cool. There's something so important here that we need to get into our heads about the history of U.S.-Chinese relations. Anyhow, Mexico is going down, baby. It's communist now, and the Chinese are moving in. And it's time to think about the Chinese differently because they're moving in. They've moved in. And I'm not going to say God forbid because, politics goes on. But if for some reason we had a President Harris, they're not only moving in, they're going to be in the master bedroom. So, could you please play number 2?
Hold your fire, Bronson. Don't shoot till you see something. How we doing, Crosley? Watch it, Crosley. We're gonna get out of here, Bronson! Watch the walls! Everybody out! Time to go, Holman. Right? Right. What happened? What the hell happened?
That's good, Tanner. Thank you. So before we get into this, do you have any idea who that was out of curiosity?
No,
That's Steve McQueen. Does that name ring a bell?
it does not.
Whoa! The Professor Penn podcast to the rescue. Steve McQueen was the number one actor of his time period, which was the 50s and 60s and 70s. People love Steve McQueen. He was cool. This is a movie that he did in 1966 called Sand Pebbles, the title of tonight's episode. And, we got different kinds of movies. There's certain kind of movies that are like psychodramas about interpersonal relationships between people. We got Man Against Nature. We've got just, cartoons with lots of explosions and pictures and loud music because, movie making's gone downhill. Now, this is what I would call an ethnography. Like the first, another movie I'd like you to watch, start with The Godfather, maybe downstream you'll get to Sand Pebbles. An ethnography is like a story that an anthropologist writes about a certain cultural scene, Like that first scene in The Godfather about that Sicilian wedding was so dramatic because it gave me, the audience member, a view into what a mafia wedding and then an Italian wedding and then a Catholic wedding was all about. It was cool. Like I got to live in that space without actually being there. And this movie was really interesting. It's 1966, okay? It's a long time ago. And this was really a movie about the relationship between China and the United States. And it's such a interesting history. And without understanding how we got to where we are, how are we ever going to get out of this mess we're in with China? Because the history is rich and deep. This was a story, this movie was about a veteran machinist in the Navy. His name was Jake Holman, played by Steve McQueen. And in 1926, he was transferred onto a boat, a gunboat called the USS San Pablo, and they patrolled the Yangtze River during clashes, the time there was clashes between Chiang Kai-shek's communists and Chinese warlords, which is an interesting comment even in itself, which I'm going to talk about. And the movie, is all about this Holman and his relationship with the Chinese and the whole scene that was going on in China at that time. And here was the scene. When he got to the boat, the San Pablo, one of the first, well, let's just start here. The first scene of the movie, he just arrived and he's sitting at a table with a British something, diplomat, scoundrel, I don't know. And he's there with some American missionaries, and they were all giving their various perspectives on China. And the British guy's perspective was, hey, these people aren't people, and they got to be ruled, and we're going to extract wealth from them, and that's good for them. And then the American missionaries had a completely different view about it. And, Holman was sitting there trying to sort it out. But in the very first scene of the movie, they set the stage that China had been colonized. And there was a thing in China at the end of the last dynasty, the Qing dynasty, where the Western powers set up in China something called concessions. Like when you go to a fair, there's concessions. You can buy peanuts and popcorn. Or when you make a concession to somebody in a negotiation, what these were enclaves where the Western powers set up shop, ran their own governance there. They were not subject to Chinese law, and they just exploited the hell out of the Chinese people. And they had militaries in there. The Germans were in there. The French were in there. The English was in there. And guess who else was in there? The United States. We were in there. The U.S. government was in there colonizing China. So when you look back at the history, there was a lot of Chinese immigration to the United States, which was resisted by guess who? The Republicans. They didn't like the Chinese. They want Chinese. They want the Jews here. They didn't want the Catholics here. And for sure, not the Chinese. Hey, they weren't even white. Now we're really getting out there. And in this movie, if you watch this movie, which I hope you do, Sand Pebbles, there's a lot of very derogatory language that is foisted upon the Chinese by the American sailors. Awful, awful. There's an N word for Chinese, which I hadn't thought about for a long time. And interestingly, when I heard that word, I heard it in association with the Vietnamese. So the very same derogatory comment that came out of the U.S. military involvement in China went to Korea and then went to Vietnam. Because think how it works. I head off to China, right? And I get there in like 1932. And I'm 18 years old. And I spend 15 years fighting in China because that's what happened. We're going to talk about it. And then I'm getting a little bit older, but now I'm senior and the Korean War breaks out. And they put me in Korea. And I look and I say, hey, this is the same people. So I use the same language. No, they're not the same people. But because I'm a racist ass, I use the same derogatory comment. And then you become my junior and I school you up in that. And then I retire or get killed, whatever, die. And now you're getting older and you go to Vietnam to lead people. And you go China, Korea, Vietnam, all the same to me. And the Japanese. But that was its own case. We're going to leave that out there. I'm going to try to give you a stream of consciousness, the Professor Penn kind of overview of the whole deal. And I'm not saying it's right. So if you're out there and you got a PhD in East Asian history and you want to pick at me, let me tell you what I think. I think you're telling a story too. And because you got a PhD, you think your story's better than my story. But guess what? You learned your story out of a book. I've been there over 100 times, maybe close to 200 times. I'm married into the culture. I know if you're a PhD and you got a great insight into East Asian culture, do you have kids that speak Chinese? Do you speak Chinese? Did you spend your entire adult life studying Chinese philosophy? Because if you did, I'm very interested in your opinion. If you learned it out of a book and you've been there 3 times, 8 times, and you work for the U.S. government, I'm not very interested in your opinion because it's not very well developed. You can't learn Chinese life from a book. They're not book people. I mean, they can read, but I'm going back to the way back. What this movie, The Sand Pebbles, is talking about. China was called the weak man of Asia because as their dynasty got to its end, and why was it the weak man? I'm going to give you a blast. The Japanese too, the Chinese and the Koreans, the Asians, when the boats showed up on the shore with the Bible and a cannon, they said, you know what? We don't think we want any. We don't want it. They closed their cultures to contact with Westerners. They didn't think the Westerners were too cool. They sure didn't want that Christianity. And man, cannon fire, they didn't have an answer. There was no answer for cannon fire. They weren't that kind of a culture. They just weren't. They had not industrialized. So when a traditional culture, not that there weren't badasses there, because the martial tradition in Asia is badass, okay? Badass. But they didn't have the Industrial Revolution. They were attempting in their own way to live in their own way. So really the West forced open Japan and forced open China to extract money and have these people were colonialists. That'd be we the people. We were there in a colony. And what did they find at the end of that Qing dynasty? They had a revolution. There was a dude named Sun Yat-sen. He was a smart professor type, and he said, we're going to have a republic, just like the United States of America. But they didn't have a monotheistic tradition to root their republicanism in. So its roots were quite shallow. And what happened almost immediately in 1921, I believe. Yes, 1921, the Communist Party of China was formed by 2 professors, and they went off in association with the Bolsheviks and started organizing a communist revolution in China. And there was a leader of this whole movement. His name was Chiang Kai-shek, Generalissimo Chiang. And what we've been taught when we were taught, and this is so critical for us to understand, We were taught that the Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek was actually our guy. He was the guy we were backing here in the United States. What we don't know is that he was a leftist because they really didn't have that concept of republicanism. It didn't exist. There was no monotheism there. He was a leftist because the fascists and the communists are both leftists. So let's quit calling fascists that they're the people of the right. They're to the right of the left, but they're not on the right. They're not over here with the Republicans. They're not over here with the people that believe in God. They're not. They're over here on the left. They're over here in the world where man makes the rules. There's no creator that grants unalienable rights. And this Chang was the Generalissimo was in charge of the whole deal. And then he betrayed the far left. And a civil war broke out in China, which lasted from 26 to 1948, where what they called the nationalists, like the National Socialist Party of the National Socialists, like the Nazis, our guys in China, fought it out with the communists, which were allied with the Bolsheviks in Russia for control of the country. So that was Chiang Kai-shek and Mao fighting it out from 26 to 48. Hey, that's a 22-year, 49, excuse me. That's a 23-year war. That's a long war, right? And China was just screwed up. And in the middle of this war, the Japanese, another leftist group, because they had no self-governance over there, another leftist group, authoritarian, they looked at their little piss-poor islands and they said, man, we can't get it done by ourselves. We got to unite the Asians against the colonialists. So their story they told was when they invaded China in 1937, we're liberating you from the colonialists. And we're going to be together. Now, they were setting up their own colony. They really weren't interested in Chinese equality, but they had a story. And their story was, we, brother Asians, are coming in to liberate our Chinese brothers from the French and the English and the Americans and the Dutch and all these countries that had opened up these concessions, and they were exploiting the country. And so this movie, Sand Pebbles, which is about a period 1926 was when this movie was supposed to be filmed, was in this soup of the Japanese were militarizing. They'd already fought their first war, the first Sino-Japanese war, I think it was 1896. They fought over Korea, Japan, China, Korea's in the middle. They had a war. The Japanese had been industrializing. They had gone and got the very best of American weaponry. We armed them. We did, the United States. We taught them how to use modern military weapons. We taught them all about how to do a modern military expedition. There's a great movie with Tom Cruise called The Last Samurai about the Japanese bringing U.S. military into Japan to modernize, to industrialize their military. So they kicked the hell out of the Chinese. They just beat them in the ground like a fence post, which made them the weak man of China. Everybody saw the Chinese are weak. Chinese were weak. A 5,000 plus year culture was being revealed that on the modern stage, the industrial revolution stage, they couldn't hang. They couldn't hang. And that was a deep shame for the Chinese people. Chinese people have the concept of face, and they're getting beat by the Japanese. Man, what is that all about? Because they've been fighting off and on for a long time. And generally, the Chinese gave the Japanese what for? Because the Chinese have the mother philosophy, the mother culture. Like in Korea, where I've been many times. They got Korea. They got their own culture. They got their own everything. But when you start talking about philosophy, it's all in Chinese. The characters are Chinese. The philosophical concepts are Chinese. The Chinese culture dominates both Korea and Japan at the philosophical level. So this Sand Pebbles movie, this Holman, he's kind of an ornery cuss. He goes his own way. And there's all this racism against the Chinese in the military. And the first thing he sees when he gets to the boat is that the boat's dependent on the Chinese, kind of like right now today. The Chinese are in the engine room. They're doing all the work. The U.S. sailors are sitting up topside. They're smoking cigars, and they're going to Chinese whorehouses. They're really not working very hard. They're really dependent on the Chinese. And the first thing Holman says is, hey, that's my engine. Get out of here. And he takes over the engine room, which kind of upsets the apple cart of Chinese-U.S. relations. The Chinese didn't like it because they were on the payroll. The Americans didn't like it because, hey, he's, revealing that this isn't really military readiness. And you think, boy, Holman's kind of an ass kicker. But actually, he's actually very respectful in defending the Chinese that were being abused because he's just one of those guys. You ever meet that guy? Doesn't matter. He's always going to take the side of the underdog because that's who he is. And that's who Holman was. So he got very deeply involved with Chinese culture and Chinese people. And his best friend, Frenchie, fell in love with the Chinese woman. And there's a very touching scene where he pledges his love to her. And she looks at him and says, you're my entire life. You're the only thing I'm going to think about. I'm going to serve you. I'm going to love you. Hey, in 1966, this was the beginning of the women's liberation movement. Oh, we thought this was just great. Look at this. So there's this thing between, American men and Chinese women that goes back to the way back. And they, all the key stuff happens in a Chinese brothel. The whole thing is just so rich of themes of intermarriage and sexual exploitation and physical exploitation and colonialization and racism. But that last scene we played was Steve McQueen, and you're missing something not knowing Steve McQueen. You just are. He's cool. His last words is, I thought I was home. What happened? Because he's shot by a nationalist soldier, which is really a communist soldier, because they were trying to expel the colonialists, which included the Americans, from Chinese soil. That was part of what they called liberation. They wanted to be liberated from Western domination, from Western exploitation. And underneath all this tension with China, we don't remember. We, the people, don't remember. But every Chinese person, including the Chinese people that I know are watching me right now, they remember the exploitation that the Chinese people suffered, both at the hands of the Japanese and at the hands of the Western powers. And for the last 75 years, maybe even more, 95 years, everything, every Chinese soul, every Chinese person, their intention has been to become not self-governing, but as a people independent from the manipulation of outside powers. And, the self-governance thing, we believe in that here as Republicans. But, my religion is mine. Okay, I'm a Republican. I am not going to sit and say, particularly after all the time I've spent in China, that the way Chinese people think about life is right, wrong, or indifferent. It's none of my business. They have every right to pursue the governance that they see fit. And we have to come up with a way of interacting with Chinese people individually and collectively in a way that brings about well-being, conflict orientation is not going to bring about maximum well-being. And we're in this perpetual kind of conflict. I was talking to somebody in the military just this week, in the military, pretty damn senior. And he was saying, oh, well, our generals think 2025, 2026, the Chinese are going to attack Taiwan. And we're getting all geared up for this battle. And I looked at him, I said, you really think so? He goes, oh, yeah. I said, you're tripping. I said, the Chinese get up in the morning and go to sleep at night thinking about making money. The Chinese people are not thinking about going to war. There's no interest in war in China. That's us, we the people. We're all spun up into. So you say, oh, the Chinese are adding nuclear warheads. Yeah, we're threatening them. We with our, not our Republican philosophy, but with our post-World War II Democrat liberal order philosophy, where we're in 172 countries, we're threatening them. They're not threatening us. They just want our money. They work harder. They work smarter. They're building a better deal than we got while we're fighting with each other. So what's going on over here? We got the Republicans on this side of the ledger, let's keep it straight, which are really the Judeo-Christian monotheists that believe there's a creator who granted unalienable rights. That's the minority group, kind of like the Christian Democrats in Germany at the time of the end of the Weimar Republic. Remember, you had the Christian Democrats, and then you had the Nazis and the communists. And the Nazis and communists, they were both on the left. They were on the left. They were fighting for the steering wheel. And the Nazis won. And then we beat the Nazis. Okay, that was the end of that. But it was the same thing. Nazis and communists, two authoritarian ideologies, only different in the economic organization of the country, but the actual authoritarianism and the governance by man over man based on Darwinism, that was Germany. And it actually happened in China too. That's the great revelation of this. If you go back and look at the history of China, you really didn't have a Republican group. They didn't have a monotheistic culture. So you had this hegemonic kind of authoritarianism that went back through all the different dynasties. And then, boy, they're getting exploited. They're weak. They say, hey, this dynasty thing, this monarchy thing, it's not working. We're going to throw that out, and we're going to get a governance and an industrial revolution going, just like in Russia. So you had two groups. You had Chiang's group, and you had Mao's group. And there were two groups to the left, and they split off because Chiang actually betrayed Mao and attacked him, and they were the fascists. Chiang's group were the fascists, allied with business, allied with the big Satan in the United States of America. That was our guy in China. And they had Mao. And those two groups came together to fight the Japanese, but all the time while they were fighting, when the Japs weren't in the area, and that's what we called them, Japs, very pejorative, they killed each other. But let me tell you, we were super involved there, and there's McQueen at the end going, I thought I was home. What happened? Kind of an existential death cry. But he really liked being in China. He liked the Chinese people. He liked Chinese food. He liked the way things went down in China. He felt he was finally at home. And they made a big deal about him being from Utah, and they let it know that he didn't fit in Utah. That's why he was in the Navy. And he liked China. He liked it. He liked it. He felt at home there. And then he died in that conflict, which he did not want to do. He got caught up in this civil war that was going on, and he ended up dying and being killed by people that he was actually quite favorable to. So there was a certain kind of bittersweet, kind of just, boy, that didn't go down the way. That script didn't turn out the way I thought it was going to turn out. It just didn't. And this was in 1926, and the Japanese invaded China in 1937, and we had this relationship with Chiang here in the United States because, fascists. Like we had a lot of people that were backing the Nazis, like Prescott Bush, George H.W. Bush's father, George W. Bush's grandfather, Prescott Bush. He was a senator. He actually got busted, jail for backing up the Nazis with money. So there was a lot of Nazi support here. We talked about that, the silver shirts, the German-American bunt. We have our own authoritarian groups that don't believe in self-governance. They believe in man governing man, Darwinism. And we had our guy Chiang over there, and the Japanese invaded. And Mao and Chiang cooperated in fighting the Japanese, but the country was at civil war. They were weak. So guess what we did? We, the people, we got right into the fight because we had a lot of money to make in China. Could you please play number 3?
Flying Tigers, the famous American volunteer group, wing their way across China for the last time as volunteers. For 8 months, these Chinese signs have been the only insignia of the most spectacular and efficient fighting force in aviation history.
Can you stop it, please, just for a sec? This is a mercenary air force, right? This mercenary thing goes back a long way. Kind of like in the Ukraine. It works good. We're going to send our boys over there with equipment, but they're not really working for us. They're really flying for the Chinese. They're saying, no, we're going to come out from behind the closet, and we're going to take a mercenary Air Force, and we're going to say it's the United States military. It's the Army. It wasn't the Air Force yet, but they came out and they were no longer working for the Chinese. They said, "Hey, well, we're actually Americans. Go ahead."
Now, wearing the emblem of their native land, the U.S. Air Force, they become regular officers with American flying forces fighting in China. A Jap flag for every plane shot down. 200 in less than 4 months. Leader of the volunteers, Brigadier General Chennault, now promoted to command all American flying forces in China. Here he outlines the field of operations. With flags and souvenirs, a grateful Chinese people pay simple tribute to the airmen who have done so much to clear the skies over their embattled land. Clearing the skies for much-needed supplies. Supplies which in turn are exchanged for the valuable raw products of China.
Getting that money out of there.
Losing no time, the new command plots the strategy of attack. By an elaborate far-flung system of Chinese listening posts, word is flashed, Japanese planes on the way, and the red ball goes up over the field. Signal for pilots to take to their ships. The Flying Tigers going into action for the first time in the uniforms of Uncle Sam. Newly assigned pilots go with the veterans. Schooled in the fighting tactics, Chennault has proven superior. Roaring aloft, they seek the enemy, their flying generals still at the controls. The new American Air Force over China, carrying on the tradition of the famous Flying Tigers. First pictures of the famous Yankee Flying Tigers in China. For many months, their bullets held open the Burma Road, beating a deadly tattoo upon the planes of Japan's Air Force. Former Army, Navy, Marine officers, transport pilots, they're the last of the world's soldiers of fortune. Today, they're a part of America's flying forces fighting the Battle of China. Volunteering before the United States entered the war, these amazing young men have astounded the world with their deeds of heroism and daring. Their leader, 50-year-old General Chennault, for 5 years advisor to the Chinese Air Force. His knowledge of Japanese aerial tactics he passed along to his American volunteers. Taking off from airfields literally paved by hand, the Tigers score for their first 90 days of fighting 470 Jap planes for 15 of the volunteers. 50 grinning Tiger Shark planes, wired together with spare parts from 50 more, were all they had to start with. Fighting in teams of 2, they concentrate their firepower. One reason for their amazing success against seemingly impossible odds. General Chennault mapping the aerial raids the Japs fear above all. American Flying Tigers.
You can imagine that a lot of Chinese people interacted with a lot of American people. We're allies with the Chinese people during the World War II period. And we'd been involved with the Chinese to the way back. And there's this connection between the American people and the Chinese people that's fraught with conflict, but also fraught with cultural sharing and insight, because East meets West. And it's backwards, right? I mean, salt on our popcorn, sugar on their popcorn, that says it all to me. And there's so many things like that, like Chinese people. When I was in China, I've been there so many times. So when you go to China, you go to a restaurant, you know what they bring you? It's like 105 degrees outside, right? You walk into the restaurant, it's a little bit cooler, but they're not into air conditioning because it's not the natural way. So what they bring you?
A little towel.
They bring you a glass of hot water.
Oh.
Okay, like we sit down here in our restaurants, they bring you a big glass of ice water, right?
I was thinking a little towel
And
or something.
No, they bring you a glass of hot water. And I look at these people and I go, Bingda. And Bingda means ice. And they look at me like, are you nuts? Bingda, please, Bingda. And they would bring me, and they'd take them like 5 minutes to find some ice because it's bad for you, right? Because our body temperature is 98 degrees. And we pour a bunch of 50-degree water down there. And it takes a lot of energy to deal with that. We, the people, we like to alter our consciousness in every way we can. And Chinese, hey, like the British got the country addicted to opium because it was a good business, slavery, drugs, and piracy, the British business model. The Chinese fought wars to end this, and they lost every time. There was 2 opium wars. They lost against the British because the British had, guess what? An industrial army. They had the Boxer Rebellion. They had these great kung fu masters came down from the hills to fight the Guaylo, the ghost people invaders. Guess what? You've been training in the temple for 40 years. Hey, at 40 yards, you're dead because a rifle proved to be quite superior. This was like the Chinese went, man, these people got some magic. They've got this industrial revolution. We've got this spiritual culture, this natural way culture. We live in harmony with nature. We really don't want to do all these guns and medicines and everything. These people, what they're doing, that's not who we are. So we conquered them. We the people and all the Western powers. And the Chinese said, man, if this is the way it's got to be, we're going to figure this out. We're going to do it better than thee. And that's where we are today.
The United States aircraft carrier Hornet, part of a task force steaming into Japanese waters, is now revealed as the secret base from which American planes first bombed Tokyo. Here is that secret airfield. 16 B-25s, twin-motored Army bombers, lashed to the Hornet's flight deck. The dramatic saga of a combined Army-Navy mission that brought panic to Japan and stirred the world for its brilliance and daring. Colonel Doolittle, now a major general, assembles his 80 volunteers before the flight. Not until this moment is their objective revealed, the heart of the island empire. A fitting touch. Japanese medals awarded United States officers for humanitarian aid to the Japanese people are returned attached to 500-pound bonds. Now, in heavy seas, some 800 miles off Japan, enemy patrol boats are sighted and sunk. Survivors are picked up and put aboard a cruiser. Fearing they have radioed Tokyo a warning, Doolittle decided to take off 10 hours ahead of schedule. Plans are changed on an hour's notice. Motors begin to warm up. Never before have big loaded bombers been launched in such numbers from a carrier at sea. For months they've trained secretly. Now for the test. Doolittle's plane is first down the runway, the commander leading the flight. As the carrier plows through heavy seas, one bomber after another soars from the flight deck, pointed for Japan. Rougher, the weather worse, but not one plane fails to get into the air. Taking the gale in its teeth, each bomber sets its course for carefully prearranged military objectives in Japan, a course that will put them over Tokyo at high noon in broad daylight. The Yokosuka Naval Base ablaze. Arms plants, rail yards, and oil refineries smashed by the raiders in Tokyo, Yokohama, Kobe, and Osaka. Then journey's end for the great adventure. Fuel gone, 15 of the planes are wrecked as their crews are forced to bail out over China and Japanese-occupied territory. The Japanese government flatly admits that of 8 uniformed flyers captured, some have been executed. This in flagrant violation of all international law. 64 of the 80 men who took off were rescued, and most of them have returned to duty. In Chongqing, Madam Chiang Kai-shek honored Doolittle and his gallant men for a raid that did much to shake the complacency of the Japanese warlords.
There's Generalissimo Chiang's wife. She was quite famous, quite glamorous, very Western. That was our crew over there. We weren't too happy with the Maoists, because we didn't like Bolshevism. And we bet Chiang, and look at how tight these cultures were. I mean, we were united together in fighting the Japanese, which was an imperial, army and really fascists, people of the left. And they were parasitizing the Chinese people. And, this is a long time ago. I mean, I'm old enough to remember this. But, I mean, we had a different kind of sense here in the United States at this time. I mean, there was now the sense is, hey, it's all about me. Because everybody's got access to all this fiat currency. So everybody's trying to run around and get rich. Back then, people were, a little bit different in what they thought was important. And there was a lot of Americans. There was a mercenary army fighting with the Chinese against the Japanese just because the Japanese were bullies. And there was money in it. Remember they said that? Soldiers of fortune. Soldiers of fortune. Now we call them mercenaries. Mercenaries. It's kind of a good, if you like killing people, it's a good job, right? If you like that kind of work, it's a good job. And this is a very famous event. I talked about it in a previous podcast, and I said I was going to bring it up subsequently, which is this Doolittle raid was just incredible. But the planes crash landed in China, and that bonding, that mutual animosity toward the Japanese bound the American and Chinese people together.
Would the atom bomb be the answer to the Chinese hordes? President Truman said that it was under consideration. On his word alone rested the decision to unleash this awful force. The world shuddered at the thought, for this catastrophic weapon struck fear in the minds of men all over the world. It mushroomed into the symbol of modern destruction. This man had devised. And in the year 1950, its power edged ever closer to him, leaving death in horrible form in its wake. Its harvest of misery would be limitless, sparing no one. It might well mean a world of men ever fleeing its fury, a world in which no one might again find peace and security. With troubled hearts and minds, men turned to the solace of religion and prayer. Hundreds of thousands of pilgrims thronged to Rome for Holy Year. As ominous events crowded the mid-century, 5 short years after a devastating war, men of all faiths prayed for peace. And while man hoped for salvation, he could also work for it through the framework of his World Parliament, the United Nations, symbol of man's hope for tomorrow.
I think I'm going to go watch that about 10 more times. There's so much in that 1 minute and 26 seconds. They talk about President Truman. Okay, so where did we go wrong as the American people? Where did we go wrong? And where we went wrong was at the 4th Democrat Convention, which was held in, I think, 1944. And in the previous 3 conventions, it was President Franklin Roosevelt running with a communist as his vice president, Henry Wallace. And Henry Wallace was a communist. He was, they might call him something else. Doesn't matter what they call him. He was a collectivist. And Roosevelt was kind of in that direction too. And in that final and 4th convention, and was just months before Roosevelt died, there was a Democrat Party coup, kind of like them taking Biden off the playing field. There was a coup led by a guy named Jimmy Burns. Jimmy Burns was the Secretary of State. Jimmy Burns was not a good dude. And they knew Roosevelt was coming to the end. They wanted to see their post-World War II Democrat liberal order emerge. And to accomplish that, they had to get rid of Wallace, because Wallace would have never dropped those bombs on Japan. That's not who he was. He would have not confronted the Soviet Union in a Cold War because he was very favorable to the Soviets. He got along great with them. They had the same kind of thinking. So they got a haberdasherer, an unknown senator from Missouri, Harry Truman, and they ran him out there, and the wise men of the party made him the vice president choice. And not too many months later, Roosevelt passed on, and Harry Truman became the president. And boy, it was a big departure from things like the Atlantic Charter, where Roosevelt had forced Great Britain to forswear its empire and to allow individual countries to self-determine. So they got rid of that kind of republicanism where Roosevelt would address the American people and pray to God. Yeah, he was a leftist Democrat, but he was still a Republican, not by party, but by philosophy. He believed in the self-determination of each sovereign citizen. So when he looked out at the world and saw all these colonies, he said, what kind of scam is this? These people are slaves. We're setting the captives free. And he made the British do it. We got a lot of people in our government that like slave taking. They like it. And they got together in the Democrat Party and they said, we're going to get rid of this Wallace dude. Can't trust him. He's kind of for the people. We want the military-industrial complex because we just put together this great thing called the atomic bomb. We're in charge of the world. Man's creation, like we saw in that short. Look what man has created, the ability to destroy the world. We're like gods now, right? We're like gods. And they got Truman in there, and Truman was the one that they erected. He was the figurehead of his day, and he was the one that took us from republicanism to the post-World War II Democrat liberal order. He did it. It's all on him. Democrats, it's Harry Truman. It was called the Truman Doctrine. In 1947, President Harry S. Truman established that the United States would provide political, military, and economic assistance to all quote-unquote democratic nations. That's kind of an interpretation, right? All democratic nations under threat from external or internal authoritarian forces. He just didn't tell everybody that we were the authoritarian force, right? Left that out because they really hadn't gotten that far. This was a new idea. So what they did was the Truman Doctrine effectively reorientated U.S. foreign policy away from its usual stance, going back to George Washington, of withdrawing from regional conflicts not directly involving the United States, beware of foreign entanglements, to one of possible interventions in conflicts far away. The Truman Doctrine arose from a speech delivered by Truman before a joint session of Congress on March 12, 1947. The immediate cause for that speech was a recent announcement by the British government that as of March 31, it would no longer provide military and economic assistance to the Greek government in its civil war against who? The Greek Communist Party. The British were out of gas. They had no more money. They had no more people. They were a spent shell. And Harry Truman, at the urging of his Secretary of State, Jimmy Burns, jumped right in there and said, we're taking over now. We're going to take on the security architecture of the British Empire to defend the rights of sovereign citizens all over the world. What a scam this was, right? But they really hadn't figured it out yet. It was still kind of well-intentioned in a kind of weird way. And they started, giving out the foreign aid. Like, for example, in that speech, Truman requested that Congress provide some $400 million worth of aid to both the Greek and Turkish governments to support the dispatch of American civilian and military personnel and equipment to those regions. $400 million. Sounds like a lot of money. But in 1947 dollars, that's about $7 billion. $7 billion for Greece. There's not that much there. If they just give the $7 billion to the Greeks, everybody would have been rich. They wouldn't have been communists. everybody would have been a millionaire. 7 billion, there's not that many Greeks. But now they got into this thing of this militarizing thing because we had the nuclear bomb. And we went off on this Truman Doctrine, which was really the establishment of the post-World War II Democrat liberal order. And it really had a lot to do with China, a lot, because Roosevelt had bequeathed to Truman this Atlantic Charter, which guaranteed the sovereignty of peoples all over the world. So Truman wrote a very long letter about the United States policy towards China on December 18th, 1946. I'll just read a little bit of it. Last December, I made a statement of this government's, the United States government's view regarding China. We believe then, and we do now, that a united and democrat China is of the utmost importance to world peace, that a broadening of the base of the nationalist government, that'd be Chiang Kai-shek, the fascists, to make it representative of the Chinese people will further China's progress towards this goal, and that China has a clear responsibility to the other United Nations to eliminate the armed conflict within its territory as it constitutes a threat to world stability and peace. It was made clear at Moscow last year that these views are shared by our allies, Great Britain, the Soviet Union. And on December 27th, Mr. Jimmy Burns, Mr. Molotov, who was the foreign minister of Russia, and Mr. Bayan issued a statement which said in part, the three foreign secretaries exchanged views with regard to the situation in China. They were in agreement as to the need for a unified democrat China under the national government for broad participation by democratic elements in all branches of the national government and for cessation of civil strife. They affirmed their adherence to the policy of non-interference in the internal affairs of China. So in other words, we were in a transitionary period. We had this non-interference thing that Roosevelt had set up in the Atlantic Charter where individual sovereign nations determine their own future path. So what happened? What happened was Mao won. And Mao won because the United States of America did not intervene in the Chinese Civil War because we had this notion of fair play. We didn't send our gunboats up the Yangtze River, as in Sand Pebbles. We let it play out. And that changed everything. Number one, the Republicans seized on this because, it was after the war. Everybody became a Democrat, right? They seized on the weakness. They called that a weakness of the Roosevelt tradition that the United States of America would not intervene. And they blamed Truman for losing China. And the Democrat Party has had the soft on communism, soft on the military, soft on interventionism all the way till today. They're just overcoming it now with Joe Biden because we're intervening everywhere. Now it's the Republican Party that wants to pull back and practice republicanism, the American nationalist movement, because we're figuring out that what we're doing has got nothing to do with republicanism. When we're sailing our 7th Fleet off the coast of China, 60 miles off the coast with nuclear weapons and submarines and planes, we're figuring out that we, the people, are the aggressors. And the Chinese are responding in kind. Now, I know that the Chinese have one mission, which is to never be conquered again by a superior technology, never to be weak again, to be strong in spirit, strong in health, strong in well-being. And that's what they got going on in their country right now. They've been working for 100 years to throw off the yoke of colonialism. So they very much resent the Democrat liberal order because it tells everybody what to do, including you, Tanner. So we got a choice here on this election. We got a group that's authoritarian. It's all over the world that tells citizens how to live. Only in America, we are the last bastion of freedom, where we got a group that sees each citizen as the sovereign. Okay, we got to make a choice. We got to make a choice because the Chinese are not going to be dominated by the United States of America, and they've developed the power to not be dominated. In fact, they're dominant. It chokes me up a little bit because I have to deal with the fact that if you want to be in business, They're the boss. It's just the way it is. Now, they're not the boss militarily. When it comes to guns, it's still a jump ball. The United States of America still has the advantage. But they're going to catch up there too. Because why? Because our country is divided, fighting the civil war between the fascists and the communists. That'd be the Democrat Party. The center Democrats, they're fascists. And then you got the far left Democrats. And then you got the Republicans over here, the real ones. That's just like Nazi Germany at the Weimar Republic. You had the Christian Democrats, you had the communists, you had the Nazis. Same battle, just different names. And in China, they didn't really have those Republicans, but they had the fascists and the communists. So this battle's been going on for since Marx. Since Marx. And what did Marx do? Marx brought a philosophy forth to end self-governance. And it really wasn't about economy or self-governance. Marx was a Jew that didn't like Judaism. He came up with a way to destroy monotheism. That's my personal perspective. So we started out the podcast. We went through this whole thing about China. And what I'm saying is this election, if we elect the Democrat liberal order or we elect republicanism, is going to have a lot to do with how our relationship with the Chinese people go. And what's interesting about the Chinese people, which I tried to show at the beginning with that very creative song, that they do communism in their own unique Chinese way. The Chinese have a deep and long, over 5,000-year tradition of art and culture and cuisine and self-development and human relations. It's done differently over there than it was done anyplace else in the world. So within that communism, there's creativity because there is freedom there. There is freedom in China. And we're not taught that. There may be more freedom in China right now than we're going to have in America if the Democrat liberal order stays in control. I mean, isn't that scary? So I want to prove it because, I like to bring the receipts. We're going to go out with a 10-minute piece from a movie called Kung Fu Hustle. And I want you to watch it and enjoy it because it really is creative and it's funny and it captures on the themes of the martial art and of magic and of music and but the filmmaker is Chinese. This guy is a monster. He's a monster. So when I see creativity like this, I know there's freedom. And so I'm rethinking my personal orientation to these issues. And I know that if we elect a republicanism, we're going to be at peace. And I know conversely that if we elect the Democrat liberal order, we're going to be and continue to be at war. Let's not think about these people that are leading these parties. They're figureheads. Let's think about the philosophies and let's vote for peace. On that note, look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. I hope Frank is watching. Hello, Frank. If you're a viewer tonight, thank you. And we'll look forward to seeing you next Tuesday, God willing. Let's enjoy Kung Fu Hustle together. Thank you very much for joining.
Have a good night, everybody.
Sorry, but I am just closing up.
You can make a suit in no time.
But I am moving away.
This is good material.
Aha, I see you know your club. This is very high quality.
How high?
How high is the sky?
will show them what it means to insult the Axe King. We will kill them and turn this place into a whorehouse. Gah!
You are blocking my view.
What's going on? Oh, forget it.
Bullseye!
Do not block my view.
Damn it, I told those nitwits to leave, but they are still here.
Really?
They are.
Oh, yeah?
What the hell is all that racket down there? I got enough problems without you.
I'm sorry. Don't pay any attention to her.
It's 4 o'clock. I want to get some sleep. Get out of here.
Shut up, you hag! It's time to die!
Die my ass. There's no way.
Listen to her. She has no idea what she's saying.
You are still blocking the view!
Hang in there.
Give us a break. Get out of here. Are you trying to kill us all?
The view!
I sense another master. It was the roar! The lion's roar! I thought it was a myth! Why didn't you tell me that it really exists? That is the last we will see of them. Right?
This is bad, boss. Get the car started. Quick. I told you to get...
What now? Keep it down. Don't you have any manners? This is a working class neighborhood. People have to be at work at 8. So get the hell out of my sight! Right now! What a bunch of hoodlums.